Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation and welcome to the conference. Thank you so much to Martina and to Tony for inviting me to deliver this keynote. My name is Laurent Bugnion, I'm a cloud advocate with Microsoft, and today I would like to talk to you about the content that we have around Azure, content that can be video, shows, events, etc., which my team is in part responsible for. And also I'm going to talk to you about a specific show called Learn Live, which is particularly dear to me because this is a show that I'm producing. So in the agenda today, we are going to start by talking about what kind of content we create, where can you find this content on Microsoft.com, and essentially all the type of content, events, shows, regular shows, but also special events, first-party event, and other type of events that we have. Then we'll talk about Learn Live. Learn Live is the show that I'm producing. It's a specific type of show with two presenters, one or more moderators, and we are also creating this show live with an audience, and we take audience questions. And so I'm going to talk to you more about what it means to create Learn Live, what it means to produce this show, and then we'll see how we actually create it using Azure as a tooling and as a platform. We'll talk about how we coordinate everything that we do, and that's in part in Azure DevOps, in part in GitHub. You'll understand why we have those two repositories of data, and also how we synchronize them. We'll see that in the demo, a little bit later. And then we'll talk also about Azure Functions. Azure Functions are the workers which create the automation that we use. It is code, and because I'm a developer, of course, I like to write code. So Azure Functions are just a perfect platform for me to develop and to deploy on. Then we'll talk about Logicabs. Now, again, I'm a developer, but I do really enjoy working with Logicabs. It's a no-code solution, or at least a low-code solution. This allows me to bind all the parts of my system together. For example, GitHub Actions can call a Logicab, which then can execute some let's say some functions, but then which can also communicate with Outlook Calendar, with Microsoft Teams, with Azure DevOps, or with other systems. And so we'll talk about that. And we'll see some demos. I'm going to show you some of the sites that we have, but I'm also going to show you a little bit of an insight into the production of Learn Live, into Azure DevOps, into our systems, our Azure function and everything. And we'll see what happens when we do create a new episode for Learn Live. So what kind of content do we create? We have really quite a number of things, and let me take you on a small tour of Microsoft.com, docs.microsoft.com/events, also my build, my ignite, and other things. So here we take a tour of myignite and mybuild.microsoft.com. Those are the pages that we have for our two big first-party events where we have the most viewers. And as you can see, we have all the content on demand there. This is managed by a lot of different teams that needs, of course, to coordinate. Learn Live is a part of that, but also other players and other shows. And of course, we have a lot of on-demand content in here. If we take a look at Learn TV is our 24/7 TV channel. It's always on, and we always have some content on it. Some content is replay from previous episodes or some on-demand content, but we also have quite a lot of live shows that play there. And so, for example, here you can see my good friend Craig, who's doing a presentation about Surface Duo. It is just one of the many shows that we have. So every time that you go to Learn TV, you will see something playing and some Microsoft content playing there. Some content is live and some content is on demand. We also have our events page. So if we go to docs.microsoft.com/events, you will see all our past events and also some promotional material for our future events. So we have, for example, here the .NET 20 years show, etc. And then we have also docs.microsoft.com/shows. And there, this is more about our regular shows. Some shows are weekly, some shows are every 2 weeks. And again, we have a lot of live content as well as on-demand content. Of course, all this content goes also on different platforms. For example, on YouTube, here you see the Microsoft Developer channel on YouTube or on Twitch, because we want to reach people where they are, and we are definitely going to try to create this content on the platforms that they are watching. So as you can see, there is really a lot of available content, and all this need to be coordinated. Let's take a look at Learn Live, and then we'll go a little bit more in detail into that. Learn Live is a show that I'm producing. It's a specific type of show. We are following a Learn module with 2 presenters and some moderators, and we are taking some live questions from the audience. So here you have an example. This is one of the shows, one of the episodes, if you want, that we created earlier on about Azure Cosmos DB. And of course, all this content needs to be maintained. It is also tied to a Learn module, the Learn module being the source of the content that our presenters are presenting. Diving a little bit deeper into Learn Live, so here we see some information about the format. And for example, you may recognize Martina, who is one of the organizers of this great conference that we are watching at the moment. Martina was one of the presenters on Learn Live earlier at the end of last year in 2021. And we always have experts, so that can be MVPs that we are collaborating with, or it can be Microsoft employees, for example, people from the product groups who wrote the product that we are talking about, some people who wrote the documentation or the Learn module that we are presenting. Always 2 presenters so that we have a nice interaction between both, and we have also some moderators who are taking care of the questions. Some of the questions can be passed to the presenters during the live show if those questions are particularly interesting to answer. And so we have quite a nice audience interaction that's happening here. Those are relatively long shows, 90 minutes, 75 minutes. I think the shortest we had were an hour long. So this is long form content, and it's rather a deep dive into the content. We also have exercises. Since all comes from Learn, you know that, or you may know that in Learn we have those sandboxes that you can create where you can try exercises for free. Everything is absolutely free, and this is running on Azure. The sandbox is going to be available for maybe 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, depending. And you can really try things out there. You can deploy containers, you can deploy some websites, etc., etc. So it's quite exciting, and our presenters are going to run through those exercises as well. So they are really going to help people to complete those modules. These are some of the shows that we are creating, that we're producing at the moment. So we have something about Azure Cosmos DB around the new certification that was recently released to the public around December, and a lot of new episodes, new modules that were released around the same time. We have the microservices series that is going to finish very soon, and in March, taking over, we are going to have a series on infrastructure, Xcode, and Bicep, which is a platform that is used on Azure to deploy Azure content, Azure infrastructure and services, and to maintain them. We also have a past episode that you can watch on demand. So here is a sample here. These are the episodes that we created in November, December last year. Something about hybrid infrastructure, something which was a little bit more of a follow-up of Ignite, the post Microsoft Ignite module medley, like we called it. And then something around .NET 6 and modern web development with ASP.NET, which was quite a popular series. So all this content is available on demand on the Learn Live site right now. But we also have special events, for example, special events in collaboration with the Microsoft Reactors. For example, we have an event which is starting soon around International Women's Day, and we have a team of women presenter and producer who is going to take care of that, and we as Learn Live are here to support them and to facilitate their work with our infrastructure. So it's quite rewarding. This is in collaboration with a reactor in London. And we also have some series which who want to touch people in their own language. This is quite new for us to try this. Here we have Azure Fundamentals in Spanish, and this is very exciting because it's the best way to be inclusive of people is really to go and talk to them in their own language, because we know for a fact that we have a lot of people who don't understand English well enough to be able to follow our show. So this is quite exciting to do that, and we are going to start with that around mid-March. So that's quite nice. So now that we talked about Learn Live, let's see how we produce those episodes. And I would like to take a tour of Devops and GitHub and understanding why do we have those two systems. And of course, one thing that you need to understand is that we have to coordinate the work of multiple people and multiple processes in order to create one single episode of Learn Live. And all those people need to talk and need to be able to communicate and understand each other. So let's take a look at our Azure DevOps and specifically the Learn Live episodes. So here we have some episodes of Learn Live in Azure DevOps, and if I open one of the queries, you see that we have here our Azure Cosmos DB series, 15 episodes, and if we open one of the episodes, we are going to see some specific data, and you will see that we have quite a rich set of information into there. We have quite a rich description for the episode, but we also have information about the producer, about our speakers, who are they. We also have, the time expressed in different time zones. This is super important because since we create content over the globe, we need to really speak the same language in terms of time zone. So we generate links that are easy to click to see the time zone information. We also have information about where the show is going to be broadcasted. And finally, every time that we create one of those episodes, it's also going to create some children items around pre-production, post-productions, etc. If we take a little bit an older episode, you see that we also have some discussions, right? And so this is a great place to keep track of this information. You can tag people from your team if you need to attract their attention. People will get email when they are tagged, and that can be a really good way to keep track of everything, all the discussions that go around producing an item and producing an episode. So this is really a great source of content. But we also keep some content in GitHub. And the reason being that, again, we need a lot of information about everything that we do. And for example, in GitHub, we have some information about our presenters and other kinds of documents that we need. So here, for example, this is one of the documents that we automatically generate. It's a YAML file, which later, when we put it on Microsoft.com, is going to be translated into an HTML page. And this is what we call our promotional page. You see that we have all the information about the episode. And if we scroll down, we also have information about the presenters and about the modules that we are going to show. Now, this is all information that we collect at some point, and we'll show that in the demo a little bit later. This information is then processed and stored, and then it is used to create a lot of documents. For example, here we had a list of short links that we need to create in our link shortener ak.ms. Or here we have a report about the metrics. This report is not quite complete yet. It's a template-based information. But it is quite useful, and really a lot of what we do when we create those documents is a lot of copy-paste, and this is very tedious. So here we have some information taking care of that. Here we see the information about our presenters. For example, I need a YouTube description because we are creating a YouTube page for our shows. The YouTube description is in a specific format. Here we see the corresponding YouTube page, and if you open, you see the description. So again, this was all generated automatically by the automation, by Azure Functions and then Logicab. Here we have yet another YAML document. It is our video page. This is a document that we need to generate the pages for our show page on ak.ms/learnlive. So here is an example. Here you see one of the video page, and down there you see the different chapter markers and other kind of information about the presenter. So again, what we wanted to avoid is really having a lot of copy-paste so that we don't waste time and that we are as efficient as possible. And so that's why we developed this automation, which is going to take care of all that. So as you can imagine, this is quite a lot of code that needs to be written. And personally, as a developer, I really enjoy writing code for Azure Functions. Azure Functions allow me to be extremely creative, to add new features to my system, to easily deploy it using GitHub Actions, And then after that, it just runs, and basically I don't need to worry about the infrastructure, which is really one of the big advantages of Function. So a quick reminder about Azure Functions: it is a serverless offering, which means that you don't need to worry as a developer as much about the server it is running on. You can basically write your code, deploy it to the cloud, and then it's just going to run, which is pretty cool. It's also going to scale very well, which in my case is not super critical, but it is still nice to have because it means that I really don't have to worry about the code I write. Of course, you want to optimize it for time and for memory consumption and everything, but essentially I know that if I want to add a new feature, it's just going to scale to this new feature, and I'm not going to have to go and buy a new server or to add server space to my Function application. That's just going to be done automatically. And so, of course, if you have a solution where you have really a big need for memory or for all kinds of things, then that's just going to scale up to that automatically. Also, those functions are very cheap to run, and you may wonder why it's important, because we are Microsoft and we run on Azure. Sure, but like every big organization, we do have an Azure budget, and if we exceed this budget, we have to justify it. And so for me, it's interesting as a Microsoft employee to have solutions which run pretty cheap and where Microsoft doesn't charge me as a Microsoft employee too much. So very interesting in that regard. However, classic functions have some limitations, what we call those consumption type functions, those functions where you are build on demand, build as you go. And some of those limitations are listed here. For example, they can take a while to wake up, right? Because since a function times out and goes to sleep so that we can save you money, it also means that it needs a little bit time to wake up. And this time is not very big, it's a few seconds, but it's still noticeable depending on the type of application you do. In my case, it's not super important because it doesn't really matter since I'm creating mostly document. If it takes a few more seconds, it's not a big deal. But if you have a system which is, for example, watching another system, for example, an IoT set of devices, then of course you want to be as close to real time as possible. Another thing is that functions time out. In the consumption mode, a function will time out after 5 minutes. And 5 minutes sounds like a long time, but it can be a little bit tight if you are generating, like in my case, a lot of documents. Remember, before we had the YouTube description, we had some email invitations, we had some YAML pages and all kinds of documents. So this timeout can be a little bit annoying, and especially if you keep adding features to your function, at some point you're going to be a little bit tight in time. So this is something you need to take in account. Also, and that's probably the most important in my scenario, functions are essentially stateless, meaning that when they are triggered, they need to get their state from somewhere. In my case, the state comes from GitHub, could be a database, it could be all kinds of things. And that is a little bit tricky because if you have a lot of functions that need to be orchestrated or coordinated, of course, it can be difficult because it means that the first function will go and call GitHub, and then it's going to commit. And if the second function gets state from GitHub while the first one is committing, you see that there can be a conflict. Also, if you have a lot of functions, like 50, 100 functions, and all those functions communicate with GitHub, at some point you're going to hit the rate limit, and this is not an efficient way of doing things. And so in order to answer to that, we used durable function. So let me tell you a little bit about durable function. Everything starts with an absolutely normal function, which is called the trigger function. And this trigger function can be, for example, an HTTP trigger. It can be a timer trigger if you want to have recurrence or whatever. And this function is an absolutely normal function, but it is going to do something special. It's going to create and start an orchestrator. An orchestrator is another type of function that we have, and this orchestrator is going to basically orchestrate, like the name says, a number of activity functions. So the orchestrator is going to start the first activity, and then the orchestrator is going to sleep. Why is it going to sleep? Because we bill you only when the function is running, and we want to save you money. All right? So the orchestrator is going to sleep, like this, you're not billed. The activity is running. Once the activity is done, the system is going to wake the orchestrator up. The orchestrator is going to start the next activity, and then after that it's going back to sleep, etc., until it is finally done, and then the orchestrator can take care of saving the state and then going to sleep. So that's really convenient because it allows me to coordinate, to orchestrate all my functions. And this also allows me to do things like, for example, in this pattern, the function chaining, meaning that I can start one function. Remember my scenario before, I said I want to get data from GitHub, and I don't want to do the next function until the first one is done. So the orchestrator is going to wait for the first function to be complete, and then it's going to start the next one. And the state of the first function, the state that the first function got from GitHub and then modified, is going to be preserved automatically by the durable function system. It's going to be stored in Azure storage in JSON format. So it is very efficient because it means that I don't need to hit GitHub every time. This state is going to be preserved. The state is then going to be passed to the second function. When the second function is done, this state is going to be preserved again automatically by the framework, etc. Another pattern that I use a lot, remember I have all those documents that I need to create. And so, for example, I need to create email invitations. I need to create meeting invitations. I need to create some email summaries, for example, with metrics and reporting. I need to create some YAML pages for the Microsoft.com website, etc. All those documents can be created in parallel. So what the orchestrator is going to do here, it's going to create a number of functions, as many as you need, and then it's going to start them all in parallel, and then it's going to wait for all those functions to complete until it continues the execution. Now this is all code, so you can orchestrate your things as you want, and you can of course combine those two patterns. You can have function chaining at first, and then some fan out, fan in, and then again some function chaining. And basically you can create a very long running process composed of multiple functions, and each of those functions is running for less than 5 minutes, and so it doesn't hit the timeout. So that really allows you to have a very nice architecture. Now, before we go into the demo, I'd like to talk to you also about Logicabs. Logicabs are one of my favorite services on Azure, even though I'm a developer and this is a no-code or at least low-code solution. So Logicab allow me to connect to a large number of services, very large number of services, hundreds of different services. It's a serverless service, which means that we are going to be built on a consumption model, so we are built on demand, only for what we use. And we don't have to worry about the server that is going to run on. I'm just going to draw my workflow, and then after that it's going to deploy automatically and run automatically. It is workflow based, so it's a little bit like the durable function scenario with the orchestrator, but it is a workflow which is drawn. So basically I'm going to connect some blocks, but some of those blocks can do some logic. For example, I have some for loops, I have some if then else, I have so conditions, right? And different kinds of things, but I also have the possibility to connect to external services such as Outlook email, Outlook calendar, maybe Microsoft Teams, which I use a lot. You'll see that in the demo, or Azure DevOps, which allows me, for example, to automatically save information to Azure DevOps when something happens in my GitHub repository. So you see all these automations that you can glue together. It's a little bit like Legos. It's really quite fascinating. And all of this is used without code, or at least with very low code. Of course, there is code in the background. You probably don't need to see it. If you have to, you can. It's JSON based. You can edit that in a text editor if you want. That works. And you can also save that into GitHub if you want to have source control on this. So this is quite convenient. It is low code, but it is very high integration. Like I said, the force of Logicab is really all the connectors. We have hundreds of connectors which allow me to communicate with external services. I mentioned some of those before, but you can also, for example, send an email with Gmail or store some information in SAP, etc. So really hundreds and hundreds of connectors, which is really interesting. So at this point, I would love to show you a demo about our system. And in this demo, what we are going to do is create a new fictional episode for Learn Live. And then you're going to see how it works. And then we'll take a quick tour of some of the Logicabs that we use to do that, so that it gives you a little bit some ideas around what you can do with those services. So let's look at this demo, and in this fictional example, what we are going to do is take a new series about Azure Fundamentals, and we are going to imagine that we already defined two of the episodes, two modules. So here is the corresponding GitHub page where you can see that we already have two modules defined. And we want to add a third fictional episode, which is going to be the third module of this Azure Fundamentals learning path. So we will need some information about the module, title, abstract, learning objectives, etc. And to do that, we are going to take a Microsoft Forms as the UI. So here I need to explain a little bit how we came to use Microsoft Form as the UI. What we wanted to avoid was to have to develop a full-blown UI from scratch that we had to maintain. And also, we wanted to go fast because we just had a few weeks leeway until the series under the new team, under my team, would start up. So we had really just a very limited time to do this. And Microsoft Forms is a really cool tool because it allows you to create fairly complex UI with very, very little effort. And also there is a very nice integration with Logicabs, like we will see later, which allows me to basically collect information in JSON format, and then after that, to pass that to an Azure function, for example. So this is pretty cool. So if we take a look at the form, we have various forms for Learn Live, for example, managing a series, managing the people, and here is the module management tool. Like I said, we can do fairly complex UI. For example, we can add some branching, which allows us to say that if the user selects, for example, here the first series, then he is going to go to the corresponding section later in the form. And like this, it allows you to build complex forms which are not too massive, but which have branches. And here we can see that I already defined for the existing series, I already defined series and modules. But we also have a possibility, of course, to create new episodes, which we will see later. We have different options, creating the episode where we collect all kinds of information about title, about the link of the module and the abstract of the module. And then after that, we also have some information about icons and graphics, and this is really interesting because here I can upload the file which goes into SharePoint, but in my Logicab I am able to get this file and then after that to send it to a blob container where it is available to the public. And so that allows me to build, to use these images for public consumptions as well. Then we have the section about dates, and here, very importantly, like I mentioned before, time zones are very complicated, and so we rely absolutely on the automation for the time zones. So here the user can enter the event's time, date and time zone, and then the system is going to take care of generating the correct information, the links to the time zone converter, as well as giving indications on when a meeting should be scheduled. That's really important. We have information about the channels because since we have multiple channels and some of the channels we need to register in order to get a slot, for example on Learn TV, it means that we have pending channels and we have confirmed channels, and that allows us to keep the overview over what we did. Similarly, for the rehearsal dates, for the onboarding dates and all that, it's really a tool to keep track of things, because when we keep sending emails to people and meeting invites to different people, it's really hard to remember, did I already send the email to that person, etc. So we have different ways to keep track of that. Then we have a section about people, producer, presenter, and moderators. And here we enter the email address as a unique identifier of the person. And we have a separate form to manage people where we can enter their headshot, their social media information, as well as their expertise and time zone and other things, which can be quite useful if we are looking for a new presenter. We have information about resources, for example, the studios in which the recording will take place, the URL to the slide, the link to the YouTube page, different graphic information, YouTube thumbnail, opener videos, closer videos, etc. And then finally, pre and post-production information, for example, the level for this episode, some video screenshot and video markers, which we use then in the show page and also in YouTube to deep link directly to portions of the video. So here I'm going to say, all right, this is a series which is not quite in the system yet, so I'm just going to enter the code of the series. The code of the series is always the months and the year and the months at which the series starts, and an ABC for multiple series. Then we have the code of the episode. This is a new episode, and each episode gets a unique code. Also, I'm going to define that it's a new episode, because otherwise the system is going to refuse the input, telling me that, oh, did you mistype the episode code? This is, of course, to avoid errors and to avoid overwriting something. Then we are going to create the episode. So let's say that this is the third number, the third episode in the series. We are going to take the title directly from the Learn module, and then we need to create an Azure DevOps item. And again, this is the key to having the link between GitHub and DevOps here. We need a link. So I'm going to go into this query. This is a query that I'm using for this demo with those fictional episodes. I'm going to create a new item, which is an episode. And here I'm just going to enter some very basic information, because later my automation is going to update the ADO item. So I don't have the Azure DevOps item. I'm going to assign the item to Learn Live, to the Learn Live series. And then I'm going to enter the information which is compulsory, entering a lead. I'm going to enter just TBD for the description. That's going to be populated automatically. And even for the dates, I'm going to choose a bogus date, because again, my system is going to update that in a moment. In DevOps, we have a really cool possibility to use tags to sort things, and we also have the possibility to chat with people from the team, which is really nice, because it allows me in that particular case, for example, to tell them that it's a dummy episode, do not handle it, all right? This is a demo. And then they can reply if they want. You can tag people, they will get emails if they get tagged. So it's really a great way to communicate with other people. Once I save this episode, I have a unique link to this item, which I can then enter into my system for later. All right, I still need some information about the item. And by the way, in the ADO item, some automation is also going to add some sub-items, some children items. So right now there is nothing, but this is already happening in the background. And then we will have information about pre-production, post-production, and basically all the things we need to produce this episode and to create a final episode if you want. So I'm going to copy the abstract. I'm going to copy the learning objectives directly straight from the Learn module. All the information is available there. And then I'm going to enter an icon. Each Learn module has a unique icon, which is in SVG format. And I already converted it in PNG just to go a little bit faster for the demo using Inkscape. So very easy to convert that. All right, are you ready to submit? Not quite yet. I'm going to enter some date information. So in this fictional example, we are going to produce this episode in June, and I'm going to say, all right, it's going to take place at 10 a.m. Very important information about the time zone in Central Europe, and the session is going to be 90 minutes. And like this, I know everything about the start and end date. I'm going to say that we are going to stream this fictional episode again to all those channels. And of course, this is all pending. I didn't have confirmation from the channel owners yet. I would, at this point, actually be ready to submit, but I'm just going to show you a little bit more. So we have more information about resources, etc. And finally, if I'm ready to submit, I can say yes. The branching is going to bring me to the final page, and then I can submit my form. So one important thing here is that I'm using Teams as an output. And why am I using Teams? It's because I can absolutely define who has access to the output messages, to those automation messages, and who doesn't. And this is, of course, super convenient, since I can really, show these messages to the right people, but I can also hide those messages from other people. Again, this is using Logicab for this integration. One thing which is interesting, now we can refresh the page. We see that we have the third episode being created. And if I jump to this episode, in the page, we see all the information that we collected right now, including the icon and everything. But of course, we have a lot of information missing. There are a lot of TBDs here, and this is all that I need to collect. I also have one section in the document that is generated automatically, which I call the missing information, which is keeping me on track with what I still need to do. And here we see that we need all the presenters, we need moderators, we need the producer. So a lot of information is missing. So let's go back to the form. And the cool thing here is that I built the system in a way that it is very resilient to null values. And so my users can go into there and they can modify only the value which they want to modify. For example, here we are going to enter a presenter, moderator, and producer, but the rest they can just leave it empty and the system is not going to crash. So it's quite important to have some strong null checks so that you don't have to fill everything every time. So I'm going to enter the email address of the first presenter. That's actually my own email address. I'm going to simulate that I'm a presenter, moderator, and also producer, which of course is not possible, but just for the demo here so that we see what is happening. Let's submit the form. Let's go back to Teams. I speed things up a little bit here. In reality, it takes a few seconds to complete. And then once we are done, we can go to the page, we can refresh. Another important thing to mention is that everything happens in branches. And so every time that I submit something to my automation, it's going to go to a branch which is named after the series that the page corresponds to. And that allows me, as the owner of the repo, to go into the repo and to make sure that I'm not inputting invalid information. I can really go and check, and I can also discard input if this input is invalid simply by rejecting the branch. So that's also a nice mechanism. So now we see that we have less information missing. And if I go back to the form, now I can go to the series management form, and I'm going to say, all right, I want to generate all the documents for this series. I need to do that explicitly in the series and not every time that I change some information in the module, because I wanted to optimize things and I wanted to avoid that we have too many operations in the Azure function, especially in the durable function, because that can become quite costly if you do that too often. Then I have here the list of the files that were generated, and I see that I already have quite a lot of information available for those episodes. And finally, if I go and check actually some of those documents, for example, here is the meeting invite for the session, and I see that it is addressed to myself since I'm going to be the presenter and the producer. I also have the time and the time zone in which this event is going to take place. Some things are still missing. Okay, that's fine. And one thing that we must note here is that we decided not to send the information automatically because we have some experience from previous shows where the system was sending meeting invitations automatically, and that was quite confusing for the users because they ended up getting a lot of meeting requests and cancellations, and it was not such a good experience. So here we are sending the invitations manually, but we generate the text and all the information needed to send the invitation. Another thing that we can note is that the Azure DevOps item has been updated. So we have a clearly defined title, we have a description, a rich description, which is in HTML format. We have the date information, presenter information. We have pretty much everything defined here according to the system. And if we go into the system and change something, it's going to update the ADO item as well. We can also see that the children item have been generated. For example, information about the post-production, pre-production, gathering the content, etc. And this really allows us to keep a good track. We also generate a calendar entry in a special calendar, which is a shared calendar with the team. And this way, we have a clear overview of when we have some sessions going on, so that if we have overlapping sessions, it's not getting a conflict, etc. And all this is again generated by some Azure Functions and by some Logicab. And I'm going to show that to you immediately right now. Let's take a look at what is powering all that. It's really a combination of Logicab and Azure Functions amongst other services in Azure, of course. One thing which is great with Logicab is that if you have a success or a failure, everything is saved, and then you can go and check exactly what happened step by step. So here, for example, we see that the HTTP function failed. There was an invalid series number. So this is an error message which is actually returned to me from the function directly. And here I can see the JSON code that was composed. We'll see that in a second, and that was sent to the function. So I'm absolutely able to take this JSON code and reproduce the failure locally so that I can debug what's happening. Let's take a look at the Logicab itself. So here I'm into the designer. You see that it's going to be triggered when the form response is submitted. I have a bunch of blocks which are taking care of the assets, the graphical assets. And here I have something which is composing a big JSON block, which is then going to be sent to my Azure function for processing. And this is what happens, which is used later to update the GitHub repo and the Azure DevOps repository. Here I have some secrets that I'm taking from Key Vault. So there is also a nice integration with Key Vault. Here I have the call to the HTTP function. And then I have some integration as well, for example, in case of error with Microsoft Teams. So you see that I just add a post message block. I have some conditions that I can test. I have some for each loops that I can execute. Here I have the possibility to post a success message in Microsoft Teams to inform my team that everything went well. I have here another example of Logicab. This is something which is going to call an Azure function to update the calendar ID. Each episode is linked to a calendar item in Outlook in our shared calendar. So this is a call to the function. And in order to update the calendar ID, the calendar item itself, here is the code. So you can see that I have here some conditions. I have here the possibility to either create an event or update an event depending on if I have the ID for the calendar item or not yet. Another such example, this is the integration with ADO, with Azure DevOps, and here we have the possibility to update a work item. So this is what my Azure function will call in order to synchronize GitHub and the Azure DevOps repository. And here we see the JSON schema, which is defined. So it's super versatile. It's very, very easy to connect to multiple services. Finally, the last thing I want to show you here, because time is running out, is the Azure Function application. I have one application with multiple functions which are running there. Like everything in Azure, I have all kinds of analytics, of metrics, of application insight, etc., etc. And if I take a look at the functions, I see that I really have mostly some HTTP triggered function. Here, this is the one which starts the durable function. I have activity functions, the ones that are actually doing work in the durable function. And finally, I have the orchestrator, which is here. So I have quite a lot of endpoints that I can use like that. Alright, so hopefully this demo was helpful and you understand a little bit better what it means to create a show like Learn Live. So in this presentation we talked about all the content that we have on Microsoft.com properties, Build, Ignite, but also smaller events that we create, also all our shows, and then even third-party events that we also help produce. So quite a lot of content really, as well as of course the specific example of Learn Live, which is my show and the shows that I produce, where you saw a little bit more of an insight into what it means to create such a show. We talked about Azure DevOps and GitHub, our source of truth. This is where we store our information and also what we use to communicate as a team and to produce each episode. And then we took a little bit a deeper technical dive into Azure Functions and Logicab, those components of the automation that we build, code versus low code, and really the collaboration into those systems and all the systems that we have around it, such as Microsoft Teams, Outlook Calendar, Azure DevOps, and more. We saw this all in the demo. Hopefully you liked this presentation and it was helpful. Here I have some information about Learn Live. So if you go to ak.ms/Learn Live, this is where you will see all our past episodes. At this point we have almost 100 episodes already. but also the schedule, if you want, for our future shows, upcoming events such as, for example, International Women's Day starting on February 28, our new bicep and infrastructure as code series starting in March, our new Azure Fundamentals episodes in Spanish starting also mid-March, and so everything you need to know about Learn Live will be there. I also have some resources, for example, our events and our shows, where you can go and browse everything we have, as well as, again, the site of Learn Live, but also some technical documentation about Azure Functions, as well as those durable functions pattern. How can you implement those? And finally, also some information about Logicab, which is the glue that pastes everything. Now, if you go to this barcode or this URL, this is where you will find a copy of the slides, as well as everything else you need in order to find those resources. I want to thank you so much for your attention. I really hope that it was useful for you. And this is where you can contact me. So I'm L Bugnion, L-B-U-G-N-I-O-N, on pretty much all social media platforms. So this is where you can find me, as well as on GitHub. Finally, I really want to thank again Martina and Tony and all the organizers of the Austrian Developer Community Day for inviting me to deliver this keynote. I hope that you have an amazing day of learning and of very rich content. And I really hope that I will see you sometimes on our streams. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Laurent Bugnion and I work for Microsoft. Thank you.